The fluorescent lights in the doctor's waiting room buzzed like angry wasps overhead. Margaret Chen sat rigid in the plastic chair, her weathered hands gripping her purse so tight her knuckles had gone white. 6 months since burying Thomas, and she still jumped every time her phone rang. But this call would change everything. "Margaret, it's Richard." Her boss's voice sliced through the receiver like a blade dipped in ice. No pleasantries, no warmth after 15 years of loyal service. Just cold, calculated cruelty. "We're letting you go. Effective immediately." The words hit her chest like a sledgehammer. Around her, other patients flipped through magazines, oblivious to the earthquake splitting her world in half. Margaret's mouth went dry, tasting copper and disbelief. "Richard, I don't understand. My performance reviews have always been excellent. The Morrison account alone brought in $3 million last quarter." His laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, that's rich coming from someone who's been bleeding us dry. The company apartment? Sold it last week. Got a nice price, too. That BMW we leased for you? Gone. Needed the capital for my expansion into the European market." Margaret's vision blurred. The apartment where she'd lived for 8 years after Thomas convinced her to downsize. The car that got her to work every morning at 7 sharp, rain or shine. Gone. Just like that. "You can't just sell my things without telling me." "Read your contract, sweetheart. Company assets. My assets. And frankly, I need someone younger, hungrier. Someone who doesn't spend half their day dwelling on dead husbands." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone screen, watching her reflection fragment in the black glass. 15 years. 15 years of missing family dinners, of working weekends, of making Richard Blackwood rich while she scraped by on her modest salary. The nurse called her name, but Margaret couldn't move. Her legs had turned to concrete, her chest burning with a rage so pure it felt like swallowing fire. That night, she sat in her suddenly alien apartment, surrounded by boxes. Eviction notice taped to her door. 24 hours to get out. The walls that had held her grief, her memories, her desperate attempts to rebuild after Thomas died, now felt like a prison closing in. She pulled out the shoebox from under her bed. The one with Thomas's final papers. The one she'd been too heartbroken to sort through. Insurance documents, medical bills, and there, at the bottom, a manila envelope with her name written in his careful handwriting. Inside, documents that made her heart stop. Stock certificates, property deeds, legal papers with numbers that didn't make sense. Thomas had been far more than the quiet accountant she'd married. He'd been investing, buying, accumulating, and according to these papers, he owned 43% of Blackwood Industries. She owned 43% of Blackwood Industries. Margaret's hands trembled as she spread the documents across her kitchen table. Real estate holdings in Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn. Investment portfolios worth millions. All of it left to her, all of it legally hers, and all of it completely unknown to Richard Blackwood. "You magnificent, secretive man," she whispered to Thomas's photo on the mantel. But her moment of triumph shattered when her door exploded inward. "NYPD. Margaret Chen, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." 3 officers stormed in, badges gleaming under her kitchen lights. The lead detective, a hard-faced woman with steel gray hair, grabbed Margaret's wrists and snapped on handcuffs that bit into her skin like metal teeth. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "There's been a mistake! I haven't stolen anything!" "Tell it to the judge, lady. We've got bank records showing you've been funneling company funds into personal accounts for years." As they dragged her past her gawking neighbors, Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B clutching her bathrobe and Mr. Kim standing slack-jawed in his doorway, Margaret felt the last of her old life crumble away. In the back of the squad car, watching her apartment building shrink in the rear window, she clenched her fists until her nails drew blood from her palms. The handcuffs clinked against the metal seat, a rhythm like a funeral dirge. "At least the handcuffs match my outfit," she muttered, looking down at her silver bracelet and gray blazer. The cop in the passenger seat snorted. But inside, behind the dark humor and the shock, something else was building. Something that felt like lightning gathering in storm clouds, like the subway's third rail crackling with deadly voltage. Richard Blackwood thought he'd buried her alive. He thought a 60-year-old widow from Brooklyn would just roll over and die quietly. He had no idea what he'd just awakened. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Margaret sat on the narrow bench, still clutching Thomas's envelope, tears streaming down her cheeks as the reality crashed over her in waves. This was rock bottom. But as she looked at those documents, proof of her husband's love and foresight, she felt something Thomas used to say echoing in her mind. Sometimes you have to hit the ground hard before you remember you've got wings. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets. But Margaret Chen was no longer the same woman who'd answered that phone call in the doctor's office. She was something far more dangerous. She was a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. 6 months earlier, Margaret Chen's alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m. like it had every morning for 15 years. The cramped Brooklyn apartment felt like a tomb since Thomas died. But she dragged herself up anyway, muscle memory stronger than grief. By 7 a.m., she was hunched over spreadsheets in her cramped cubicle on the 32nd floor of Blackwood Industries. The glass walls of Manhattan's financial district stretched endlessly around her, a concrete jungle where dreams went to die and bank accounts went to multiply. "Chen! Where's the Morrison projection?" Richard Blackwood's voice cut through the morning bustle like nails on a chalkboard. Designer suit pristine, hair slicked back. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine about men who crush souls for breakfast. "On your desk since yesterday, Richard." Her Brooklyn accent sliced through his corporate polish. "Along with the quarterly analysis and the client retention report you asked for last week." He didn't even glance at the papers, just grabbed them and strutted toward the conference room where potential investors waited, ready to take credit for her 60-hour work week. This was her life, the ghost in the machine, the woman who made Richard Blackwood look brilliant while he collected bonuses that could have bought her apartment building twice over. Margaret's fingers flew across the keyboard, numbers dancing before her tired eyes. She'd built this department from nothing, turned it into the company's profit engine. But in 15 years, she'd never sat at that mahogany conference table. Never shook hands with the clients whose accounts she managed. The memory hit her like a freight train. Thomas at their kitchen table 6 months ago, syrup dripping from his fork as he read the morning paper. His face went white, then red. Then he clutched his chest. "You're tougher than this city, love," he'd whispered, as the paramedics worked over him. Those were his last words before the heart attack took him away, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. She'd thrown herself into work after the funeral. Staying late became staying all night. Numbers became her only language, spreadsheets her only friends. Richard piled on more projects, more deadlines, more impossible demands. "You're such a trooper, Margaret," he'd say with that plastic smile. "Don't know what I'd do without you." Liar. The phone call in that doctor's waiting room played in her head like a broken record. The casual cruelty, the smug satisfaction in his voice when he'd stolen everything she had left. But Thomas had left her something else. Something Richard Blackwood had no idea existed. Back in her apartment that night, surrounded by moving boxes and eviction notices, Margaret spread the documents across her kitchen table like tarot cards, revealing her future. Stock certificates dating back 20 years. Property deeds for buildings she'd never seen. Investment portfolios in Thomas's careful handwriting. Her quiet, gentle husband had been a financial wizard in disguise. Every modest paycheck, every careful budget decision, every small investment he'd mentioned had been building toward this moment. 43% of Blackwood Industries belonged to her. The woman Richard treated like office furniture owned nearly half his empire. The irony was so sharp it could have cut diamonds. But her moment of triumph lasted exactly 18 hours. The FBI raid came at dawn, agents and windbreakers swarming her building like wasps. Neighbors pressed against windows, phones out, recording her humiliation for social media glory. Margaret Chen, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit larceny. The handcuffs clicked shut as Channel 7 News rolled up, cameras hungry for the morning's feeding frenzy. "Corporate thief caught red-handed" would be the headline, her face plastered across every screen in New York. "This is a setup," she screamed as they dragged her past the camera crews. "Check the books. Look at the real numbers." But who listens to a woman in handcuffs when there's a story about greed and betrayal to sell? Her bank accounts froze within hours. Her lawyer friend David Kim stopped returning her calls. 15 years of colleagues suddenly developed selective amnesia about Margaret Chen's existence. At Rikers Island intake, a woman with silver teeth and laugh lines around her eyes looked Margaret up and down. "Welcome to the real corporate ladder, sister. It's all downhill from here." Despite everything, Margaret almost smiled. At least someone in this place had a sense of humor. Her cell was 8 feet by 10 feet of concrete and despair. The toilet didn't flush properly. The mattress felt like sleeping on cardboard, and her cellmate was a check forger named Rosa, who snored like a freight train. But Margaret's mind was razor sharp in the darkness. She called David Kim from the prison payphone, speaking in code they'd developed during late-night study sessions in law school 30 years ago. Within a week, he'd smuggled in copies of Blackwood Industries' real financial records. The trail was there, buried in digital breadcrumbs and forged signatures. Richard hadn't just fired her and stolen her assets. He'd been systematically draining company accounts for months, creating false invoices and phantom contractors. Her name was on the paperwork, but the handwriting analysis would prove it was all forgery. The timestamps on the digital transactions showed she'd been in meetings or on vacation during the supposed thefts. Richard Blackwood had been sloppy in his desperation. His European expansion was really a desperate gamble to cover mounting debts from his cocaine habit and gambling losses. He'd used Margaret as the perfect scapegoat, a grieving widow who'd be too broken to fight back. He'd underestimated the woman from Brooklyn who'd survived 40 years in Manhattan's financial shark tank. On her 7th night in prison, lying on that cardboard mattress while Rosa snored and roaches scuttled across the ceiling, Margaret Chen smiled in the darkness. "They took my freedom," she whispered to the concrete walls. "But they didn't take my fight." Above her head, fluorescent lights hummed like the building's heartbeat. Somewhere across the city, Richard Blackwood was probably sipping champagne in his penthouse, thinking he'd won. He had no idea that his victory was about to become his funeral. Margaret closed her eyes and began planning his destruction, one devastating move at a time. Rikers Island at 6 a.m. was hell with fluorescent lighting. Margaret Chen stood in the chow line, tray in hand, learning the unspoken rules of a world where respect was earned with fists and favors. "You, the white-collar lady?" The voice belonged to Carmen Rodriguez, a woman built like a linebacker with eyes that had seen too much. "Word is you know numbers." Margaret nodded carefully. "In here, your reputation traveled faster than gossip in a small town. My appeal's coming up. Need someone to check if my court-appointed lawyer's screwing me over on restitution calculations." Carmen's smile revealed a gold tooth. "I protect you from the sharks. You protect me from getting robbed blind. Deal?" "Deal." And just like that, Margaret found her place in the prison ecosystem, trading tax advice for safety, showing women how to track their commissary accounts while learning which guards to avoid and which inmates ruled each block. The cafeteria erupted into chaos on her 10th day. Someone accused someone else of stealing cornbread, and suddenly metal trays were flying like deadly frisbees. Margaret hit the floor as a sharpened toothbrush whistled past her ear, close enough to part her hair. "I've faced worse audits than this," she muttered to Rosa, who was crouched beside her under their table. But the joke felt hollow. This wasn't some corporate boardroom where the worst injury was wounded pride. Here, one wrong move could land you in the medical wing or worse. The memories came at night, when the lights went out, and the sounds of women crying and fighting echoed through the concrete corridors. 25 years at Blackwood Industries, starting as a junior analyst fresh out of Queens College. She remembered training Jennifer Walsh, a bright kid from Staten Island who reminded Margaret of her younger self. How she'd stayed late to help Jennifer master the company's accounting software, shared her lunch when the girl couldn't afford the cafeteria prices. Jennifer was probably sitting in Margaret's old office now, wondering how her mentor had fallen so far. The phone call to her sister Linda was the hardest 3 minutes of Margaret's life. They hadn't spoken since Thomas's funeral, some stupid argument about family obligations that seemed microscopic now. "Linda, it's me." Silence stretched across the connection like a chasm. "I built that company with my sweat," Margaret whispered into the receiver. 25 years of 60-hour weeks, missed holidays, skipped vacations. And he stole it like it was pocket change from a tip jar. Her voice cracked on the last word. Linda's sharp intake of breath was audible across the miles between them. "Maggie, I saw it on the news. I wanted to call, but I didn't know what to say." "Say you believe me. That's all I need." David Kim's visits were the lifelines keeping her sanity afloat. Her old law school friend had grown soft around the middle and gray around the temples, but his mind was still razor sharp. "The digital forensics are devastating," he said during their second meeting. Files spread across the metal table between them. Richard's been moving money for 8 months. Phantom consulting fees, fake vendor payments, the whole playbook. He slid a manila folder across the table. "These emails show him instructing his assistant to forge your signature on wire transfer authorizations. We've got him dead to rights." Margaret's hands shook as she flipped through the evidence. Richard's own words, damning him in black and white. His hubris had made him careless, and careless men left trails. The prison yard was where Margaret found unexpected wisdom. Sitting on concrete bleachers, watching women play basketball with the intensity of Game 7, she listened to their stories. "Hey, white collar," called out Denise, a check forger with a PhD in chemistry. "Teach me how to launder money the legal way. You know, offshore accounts, shell companies, the fancy stuff." Margaret laughed despite herself. "It's called investment diversification, and it's perfectly legal when you file the right paperwork." These women weren't monsters. They were mothers, daughters, sisters who'd made bad choices or gotten caught in impossible situations. Just like her. That night, alone in her cell while Rosa snored, Margaret carefully unfolded Thomas's letter, the one hidden at the bottom of the envelope with all those legal documents. "My dearest Margaret," it began in his careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing something terrible. I always knew you were stronger than this city, stronger than any challenge it could throw at you. You're the boss they never saw coming, the storm they never prepared for. Use what I've left you. Build something better. I love you always. Thomas." The words blurred as tears rolled down her cheeks. Thomas had known. Somehow, he'd known she'd need an arsenal for a war she didn't even know was coming. Margaret befriended Sarah Washington, a 45-year-old teacher, wrongfully convicted of embezzling from her school's fundraising account. Like Margaret, she'd been framed by someone she trusted, someone who'd used her access and good reputation as cover for their crimes. "They think we'll just disappear quietly," Sarah said one evening as they walked the yard's perimeter. "Middle-aged women are supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps they get." "They're about to learn differently," Margaret replied. The bail hearing was a circus. News cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions as Margaret walked past in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and no patience for drama, reviewed the case file with methodical precision. Given the severity of the charges and the defendant's access to significant financial resources, bail is denied. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Margaret felt the sound echo in her chest, in her bones, in her soul. But instead of despair, she felt something else rising inside her. Something that felt like lightning gathering strength before the storm. "This cage won't hold me forever," she whispered to David, as the bailiffs led her away. Back in her cell that night, Margaret Chen wasn't the broken widow Richard Blackwood thought he'd destroyed. She was a woman with a plan, evidence to clear her name, and the resources to bring down an empire. Most importantly, she was a woman with absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The real war was just beginning. Freedom tasted like stale air and broken promises. Margaret Chen walked out of Rikers Island after 4 months, 23 days, and 16 hours. Her orange jumpsuit traded for the wrinkled clothes she'd worn the day they arrested her. The woman who emerged wasn't the same one who'd gone in. Prison had carved away everything soft, leaving behind something harder, sharper, more dangerous. Her cheekbones jutted like knife edges. Her eyes burned with the kind of fire that could light up Times Square on New Year's Eve. Her apartment looked like a crime scene. Furniture sold to pay legal fees. Personal belongings scattered like debris after a hurricane. The walls that once held family photos now showed pale rectangles where her life used to hang. But Margaret wasn't here to mourn. She was here to plan. The pawn shop laptop cost her $200 and looked like it had survived the apocalypse. The burner phone was another $50. With David Kim's help, she began assembling her arsenal piece by piece, evidence by evidence, lie by lie. Richard Blackwood thought he'd won. The news articles painted him as the hero who'd exposed corporate corruption, the vigilant CEO who'd saved his company from a trusted employee's betrayal. Forbes was planning a feature story about his European expansion. He had no idea that his victim was back and hunting. Margaret's first surveillance mission took her to the Rainbow Room on a Tuesday night. Through borrowed waitress uniforms and David's connections in the catering world, she found herself serving champagne to Manhattan's elite at Richard's victory celebration. The irony was delicious. Here she was, invisible in plain sight, watching Richard toast his success with champagne, bought with money stolen from her pension fund. To new beginnings in cleaning house, Richard announced to the crowd, his arm draped around a blonde woman young enough to be his daughter. Margaret approached with a silver tray, her face hidden behind oversized glasses and a server's cap. As she reached for his glass to refill it, her hand slipped. Dom Perignon splashed across Richard's $1,000 tuxedo like golden justice. "Oops," Margaret said sweetly, dabbing at the stain with her napkin. "Karma's a bitch, isn't it?" Richard's face flushed red, but he was too image-conscious to make a scene at his own party. "Just be more careful," he snapped. If only he knew how careful she planned to be. But surveillance work didn't pay the bills. Margaret's criminal record made her toxic to every financial firm in the city. 25 years of expertise meant nothing when embezzler appeared on background checks. She took what she could get. Data entry at a medical billing company, night shifts cleaning office buildings, anything that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. The coffee shop in Park Slope felt like neutral territory. Linda sat across from her, older and grayer than Margaret remembered, but her eyes still held the warmth that had gotten them through childhood in Bensonhurst. "You look different," Linda said carefully. "Thinner. Harder." Margaret stirred her coffee, watching the cream swirl like storm clouds. "Prison stripped me bare, but it showed me my worth. I'm not the victim Richard Blackwood thinks I am." "What are you planning, Maggie?" "Justice. The kind that actually sticks." Linda reached across the table and squeezed her sister's hand. For the first time in months, Margaret felt like she wasn't fighting this war alone. The breakthrough came through David's contacts in the district attorney's office. Richard's partner in the European venture, Viktor Petrov, had fled to Switzerland with $12 million in what he claimed was investment capital. But Margaret knew better. She'd seen those same numbers in the company books, disguised as consulting fees and equipment purchases. Viktor hadn't just taken Richard's money. He'd taken Richard's escape plan. Now Richard was stuck in New York, exposed and desperate, with creditors circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Margaret began her campaign of precision strikes. Anonymous tips to the SEC about irregularities in Blackwood Industries' quarterly reports. Leaked documents to investigative journalists showing discrepancies in the European expansion timeline. Each move was calculated, surgical, designed to tighten the noose around Richard's neck, one loop at a time. At Calvary Cemetery in Queens, Margaret knelt beside Thomas's headstone. brushing fallen leaves from the polished granite. The November wind cut through her thrift store coat like ice, but she barely felt it. "I'm going to make this right," she whispered to the stone that bore his name. "For both of us. For everyone he's hurt." The roses she'd brought were wilted, but she placed them anyway. Thomas had always said that effort mattered more than perfection. Her phone buzzed. David's text was 3 words long. "Got the smoking gun." Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs as she read his follow-up message. A forensic accountant had found the original documents Richard had forged, complete with his fingerprints, and a paper trail leading straight back to his personal accounts. But her moment of triumph was shattered by the sound of footsteps on gravel behind her. "Margaret Chen, you're a hard woman to find." She turned to see 2 men in expensive suits, their faces hidden behind sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Richard's cleanup crew. "Mr. Blackwood wants to have a conversation with you. Something about letting sleeping dogs lie." Margaret's hand closed around the pepper spray in her pocket. Prison had taught her that running was sometimes the better part of valor. "Tell Mr. Blackwood that some dogs bite back." She sprinted between the headstones, her sneakers slipping on wet grass as shouts erupted behind her. The cemetery's back entrance led to a maze of Queen Street she'd known since childhood. They chased her for 6 blocks through the rain, but Brooklyn girls know how to disappear when they need to. In the safety of a 24-hour laundromat, Margaret caught her breath and checked her phone. David's evidence was already uploaded to the cloud, backed up in 3 different locations. Richard Blackwood had just made his biggest mistake. He'd shown his hand, revealed his desperation, proved that he knew exactly how guilty he was. Margaret Chen smiled in the fluorescent light of the laundromat, surrounded by the smell of detergent and the sound of washing machines. The hunt was almost over. Soon, it would be time for the kill. The uniform scratched against Margaret's skin like pennants. Navy blue polyester with Supreme Cleaning Services embroidered across the back, transforming her from executive to invisible in one humiliating costume change. Walking through the lobby of Blackwood Industries at 5 a.m., pushing a cart full of mops and industrial disinfectant, she felt the weight of cosmic irony. 6 months ago, she'd ridden the elevator to the 32nd floor. Now she was taking the service elevator to clean other people's messes. From corner office to corner mop, she muttered under her breath. Talk about a demotion. But invisibility was a superpower she'd never possessed before. Security guards nodded without seeing her face. Executives walked past her like she was furniture. Night janitors were ghosts in the machine of corporate America. The mini recorder tucked inside her mop handle captured everything. Board meetings discussing quarterly projections. Richard's increasingly frantic phone calls to lawyers. Heated arguments about the missing European funds that had everyone walking on eggshells. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs as she emptied waste baskets outside the conference room, listening to Richard's voice through the crack in the door. The Chen situation is handled. She's discredited, broke, and too traumatized to cause problems. We can focus on damage control for the Victor situation. If only he knew that the Chen situation was mopping the hallway 3 feet away. The close calls came nightly. Security making unexpected rounds, while she photographed documents with her phone. File cabinets that should have been unlocked, suddenly requiring her to pick locks with skills learned from her cellmate Rosa. Tuesday night almost ended everything. She was deep in Richard's office, photographing his private correspondence when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Margaret hit the floor behind his desk as the security guard's flashlight swept across the windows. 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Her phone's camera light burning like a beacon in her hands. The guard's radio crackling with static as he reported his location. All clear on 32. She waited another 10 minutes before breathing normally again. The memories came in waves as she cleaned the same offices where she'd once commanded respect. Thomas's proud smile when she'd landed the Morrison account. Family dinners where she'd shared war stories from the corporate battlefield. Birthday parties in the conference room, back when Richard still pretended to care about his employees. That was before greed and desperation turned him into a monster. Her real purpose revealed itself one evening when she encountered Jessica Park, a 24-year-old analyst working late again, tear tracks visible on her cheeks. The girl reminded Margaret of herself 3 decades ago, burning with ambition but drowning in a boys' club that viewed women as expendable. "He makes me stay late to redo reports he's already approved," Jessica whispered during a chance encounter in the supply closet. "Says my work isn't detailed enough, even though it's identical to the male analysts." Margaret pretended to organize cleaning supplies while dropping truth bombs. "Document everything. Timestamps, witnesses, emails. And don't let them dim your light, kid. Some of us fought too hard to watch the next generation get snuffed out." Jessica's eyes widened with recognition, but Margaret was already gone, disappearing into the maze of cubicles like smoke. Richard's paranoia reached fever pitch by December. 3 employees fired for security breaches. The IT department installing new surveillance cameras every week. Random bag searches and lie detector tests that had everyone walking on eggshells. But paranoia made people sloppy, and sloppy people left evidence lying around. The discovery that shattered her last illusion about Richard's humanity came in a file marked Asset Recovery. Thomas's investment portfolio, worth millions, had been liquidated to cover Victor's theft. Her husband's legacy, his life's work, turned into poker chips in Richard's desperate gamble. She found herself crying over a bucket of Pine Sol at 3 a.m., grief and rage mixing like toxic chemicals in her chest. The real bombshell arrived via David's encrypted message. Viktor Petrov had been arrested in Geneva, trying to board a flight to Moscow with a suitcase full of bearer bonds. The Swiss authorities were freezing his accounts and preparing extradition papers. Richard was about to discover that his partner hadn't just stolen his money. He'd left him holding the bag for a dozen international fraud charges. Margaret's solitary moment came on a snowy Friday night, alone in the building, except for the security guards. She found herself standing in front of her old office, now occupied by Richard's nephew, a 26-year-old MBA with more confidence than competence. Her nameplate was gone, but she could still see the ghost outline where it had hung for 15 years. She pressed her palm against the glass, remembering the woman who used to sit behind that desk. The woman who'd believed in loyalty, hard work, and corporate meritocracy. That woman was dead. What stood in her place was something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. The hack required skills she'd learned from Carmen Rodriguez, her prison protector who'd taught her that survival sometimes meant bending rules until they snapped, planting digital breadcrumbs in Richard's personal files, creating an evidence trail that would lead investigators straight to his offshore accounts. Each keystroke felt like loading bullets into a gun she'd soon fire at point-blank range. David's call came at midnight on a Sunday, his voice crackling with excitement through her burner phone. "The trust documents are authenticated. Thomas's shares are legally yours, and the board meeting is scheduled for Monday morning." Margaret Chen, cleaning lady and ghost of corporate Christmas past, smiled in the darkness of the supply closet. After 6 months of humiliation, investigation, and preparation, all the pieces were finally in place. "Game on," she whispered to the mops and buckets that had been her companions in this elaborate charade. Monday morning would bring justice. But tonight, she had one last shift to finish, one final performance as the invisible woman who'd been hiding in plain sight. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwood would discover that the dead sometimes rise from their graves to collect what's owed. And Margaret Chen was about to collect with interest. The text message came from Jennifer Walsh at 7 a.m. sharp. "Bean Their Coffee, 8th and Broadway, 1 hour, come alone." Margaret's former mentee looked older, more cautious, glancing over her shoulder like a spy in enemy territory. The bright-eyed kid from Staten Island had been replaced by a woman who understood that corporate loyalty was a one-way street paved with broken dreams. "He's getting desperate," Jennifer whispered over her macchiato, "firing people left and right, blaming everyone for the European disaster. Yesterday, he screamed at Maria from accounting for 20 minutes about missing receipts that don't exist." She slid a flash drive across the table like contraband. Internal emails, financial projections, everything you need to know about how deep this hole really goes. Margaret pocketed the drive, feeling the weight of digital ammunition. Why are you helping me? Because you taught me that integrity matters more than paychecks. And because what he did to you was evil. More allies emerged from the shadows of Blackwood Industries. Sarah from HR, who'd been documenting Richard's discriminatory hiring practices for months. Kevin from IT, who'd noticed the suspicious server activity during the embezzlement timeline. Lisa from marketing, who'd been forced to create fake press releases about the European expansion. They met in coffee shops, park benches, subway platforms, a resistance network of corporate refugees united by shared trauma and mounting evidence. But Richard wasn't sitting still either. Margaret first noticed the tail outside her sister's apartment in Bay Ridge, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows, following her subway commute for 3 consecutive days. The private investigator was good, but prison had taught her to watch for watchers. The chase began at Union Square Station during rush hour. Margaret spotted the PI's reflection in a store window and made her move, diving into the crowded subway entrance like a salmon swimming upstream. Through the turnstiles, down the stairs, switching trains at the last second as doors slammed shut. The PI's frustrated face disappeared behind moving metal as Margaret's train pulled away into the tunnel's darkness. She surfaced at Times Square, gasping and adrenaline drunk, when a concerned tourist asked if she was okay. "Ever feel like life's one big bad rom-com?" she panted, straightening her coat. "Except the leading man is a sociopath and there's no happy ending in sight." The breakdown came without warning on a Tuesday evening in Linda's kitchen. One moment Margaret was reviewing financial documents, the next she was sobbing into her sister's shoulder like a lost child. "I lost my husband, my job, my freedom," she choked out between gulps of air. "But I won't lose myself. I can't let him win by becoming something I'm not." Linda held her tight, stroking her hair like she had when they were children, hiding from their father's drunken rages. "You're not lost, Maggie. You're just becoming who you were always meant to be." The revelation that changed everything came through Jennifer's next intelligence drop. Richard had discovered Victor's arrest in Geneva and was planning to throw another innocent employee under the bus. Michael Torres, a junior analyst with a sick mother and student loans, was about to become the next Margaret Chen. The video call between Richard and Victor, secretly recorded by Sarah in HR, revealed the full scope of their desperation. Victor, speaking from a Swiss detention cell, delivered the final betrayal. "You think I'm going down alone? I have records of every transaction, every forged signature, every lie you told the board. Cut me loose and I burn everything to the ground." Richard's face went white as Victor held up a thick manila folder. "This is your insurance policy walking away, Richard. Better find another patsy fast." Margaret's network of wronged women had grown into something powerful. They called themselves the Phoenix Circle, meeting monthly in Linda's basement to share stories and strategies. Former Blackwood employees, women from other companies, victims of workplace harassment and financial fraud. "They think they can bury us one at a time," Margaret told the group during their December meeting. "But we're stronger when we stand together." The stress was taking its toll. Margaret's blood pressure spiked during a routine checkup, earning her a lecture from Dr. Martinez about the physical cost of carrying so much rage. The loneliness hit hardest at night, when the empty apartment reminded her that Thomas would never see justice served. But she pressed on, driven by something beyond personal vengeance. This was about every woman who'd been discarded when she became inconvenient. Every employee betrayed by bosses who saw people as disposable assets. Blackwood Industries was hemorrhaging money faster than a severed artery. The European disaster had cost them $40 million. But the real damage came from the exodus of talent fleeing Richard's increasingly erratic leadership. Stock prices plummeted as rumors of financial irregularities spread through Wall Street. Margaret's surveillance mission at the annual shareholders meeting nearly ended in disaster when she tripped over her own feet trying to get closer to the stage. The recording device went flying, bouncing across the marble floor like a metallic pinball. "Excuse me. Dropped my phone," she mumbled, diving between expensive shoes to retrieve the evidence that would seal Richard's fate. The audio she captured was pure gold. Richard admitting to the board that the European funds were temporarily misplaced and promising to resolve the situation with minimal impact to stakeholder confidence. Translation: he was planning to destroy Michael Torres the same way he'd destroyed her. Late into the night, Margaret sat at Linda's kitchen table surrounded by financial documents, legal briefs, and evidence that could topple an empire. Her eyes gleamed with the focused intensity of a general planning the final assault. The board meeting was scheduled for January 15th. Richard would present his quarterly report, expecting another round of applause for his innovative leadership. Instead, he was about to face the phoenix, rising from the ashes he thought he'd scattered to the wind. Margaret Chen was done playing defense. Tomorrow, she would reveal her hand and watch Richard Blackwood's world collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. The war was almost over, and victory tasted like justice served ice cold. January 15th dawned gray and cold, but Margaret Chen had never felt more alive. The Armani suit hung perfectly on her lean frame, prison having carved away everything unnecessary until only steel remained. She stood outside the glass towers of Blackwood Industries, watching executives hurry past in their morning rush. 6 months ago, she'd been one of them. Today, she was their new owner. The 32nd floor boardroom buzzed with pre-meeting tension. Board members shuffled papers and whispered about quarterly projections, while Richard Blackwood adjusted his tie, preparing to deliver another performance about fiscal responsibility and strategic vision. He had no idea his world was about to end. Margaret's heels clicked against marble as she strode through the reception area, past the security desk, where guards who'd once nodded respectfully now looked through her like she was invisible. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't about to become irrelevant. She pushed open the boardroom doors without knocking. 12 faces turned toward her in perfect synchronization, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition to shock in the span of heartbeats. Richard's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, his face draining of color like someone had opened a valve. "Gentlemen, ladies," Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "I believe you're having my meeting." "Security!" Richard's voice cracked as he lunged for the phone. "Get security up here now!" "That won't be necessary." Margaret placed a manila folder on the polished conference table with deliberate precision. "I'm the majority shareholder. This is my boardroom now." She opened the folder, revealing Thomas's meticulously organized documents. Stock certificates, trust agreements, property deeds. 20 years of quiet accumulation that added up to 43% of Blackwood Industries. Gasps rippled around the table like stones dropped in still water. Board member Patricia Wells leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the light as she examined the paperwork. "These appear to be authentic," she said in a voice thick with disbelief. "You sold my life for your greed," Margaret said, her gaze locked on Richard's crumbling face. "Stole my pension, my dignity, my freedom. Now watch me buy back the company with interest." The room erupted in whispered conversations. But Margaret wasn't finished. She pulled out the next stack of documents, evidence of Richard's embezzlement spreading across the table like a royal flush. "Don't worry," she said with deadpan precision as board member Harrison coughed awkwardly. "I brought receipts. Forged signatures, phantom consulting fees, wire transfers to shell companies in Victor's name. The entire European expansion revealed as an elaborate money laundering scheme disguised as business development." Richard stood frozen, watching his empire collapse in real time. "You can't do this. I built this company. I saved it from..." "From what? Honest accounting? Ethical leadership?" Margaret's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You built this company on my back, then tried to bury me when I became inconvenient." The memories flashed between them like lightning. Prison uniforms and handcuffs, cleaning toilets while he sipped champagne. The humiliation designed to break her spirit but had forged it into something unbreakable instead. "I'd like a moment alone with Mr. Blackwood," Margaret announced to the stunned board. "Unless anyone objects to the new majority owner exercising her authority." The boardroom emptied faster than a theater during a fire alarm, leaving Margaret and Richard facing each other across 20 feet of polished mahogany and 15 years of shared history. You took my dignity, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Made me question everything I believed about loyalty, hard work, justice. But you know what? You gave me something more valuable than anything you stole. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. You gave me clarity about who I really am when everything else gets stripped away. Richard collapsed into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. What do you want? Money? I can transfer. I want you to understand what you did. Margaret pulled out her phone, showing him news footage from his arrest. Viktor Petrov in handcuffs at Geneva Airport, federal agents seizing computers and files. Your partner rolled over faster than a trained seal. Bank records, email transcripts, recorded phone calls. The FBI has everything. Richard's hands shook as he reached for his briefcase. I can make this right. Split the European accounts. Give you back what I took. You can't give me back 4 months of my life in prison. Can't undo the nights I spent wondering if I'd lost my mind, if I really had done what you accused me of. She leaned across the table, close enough to see her reflection in his terrified eyes. But you can face the consequences of your choices, like an adult. The transformation began immediately. Within hours, Margaret had appointed Jennifer Walsh as interim CFO and Sarah Martinez as head of human resources. The Phoenix Circle Network provided a pipeline of qualified women ready to rebuild Blackwood Industries from the ground up. The financial turnaround started with brutal honesty. Margaret addressed the remaining employees via company-wide video conference, laying out the scope of Richard's theft and her plans for ethical restructuring. We're going to be smaller, leaner, but we're going to be honest, she told the cameras. No more phantom projects. No more creative accounting. Just good work, fair wages, and respect for every person who walks through these doors. That evening, Margaret sat in her sister's kitchen, holding her phone with trembling hands. Linda watched from across the table as Margaret dialed, tears already streaming down her face. We won, she whispered when Linda picked up, her voice breaking on the words. For all of us. For every woman they tried to discard. Outside, snow fell on Brooklyn like absolution, covering the streets where Margaret Chen had learned to fight, to survive, to rise from ashes stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Richard Blackwood sat in his empty penthouse, termination papers spread across his kitchen table, watching his former empire transform on the evening news. The woman he tried to destroy was rebuilding his life's work into something better than he'd ever dreamed. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure the next person didn't have to fight the same battle alone. And Margaret Chen was just getting started. 6 months after the boardroom reckoning, Margaret Chen stood in the corner office that had once been Richard's empire. The view of Manhattan stretched endlessly before her. But the real transformation was happening inside these walls. Blackwood Industries had become something unprecedented in corporate America. A company built on second chances, ethical profit, and the radical idea that employees were human beings deserving of respect. The Second Chance Initiative was Margaret's crown jewel. A legal defense fund for wrongfully accused workers, staffed by attorneys who specialized in corporate fraud cases. They'd already cleared 8 innocent employees at other companies, saving careers and lives destroyed by corrupt bosses. Phoenix from ashes, Margaret murmured, watching construction crews renovate the building across the street. Everything in her life seemed to be rebuilding simultaneously. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Richard Blackwood stood in the doorway, wearing Supreme Cleaning Services coveralls, his once perfectly styled hair now gray and unkempt. Ma'am, finished the executive floor. Should I start on 31? The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The man who'd once commanded this empire now cleaned its bathrooms, just as she'd once cleaned his office while gathering evidence of his crimes. But something had changed in Richard's eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wisdom earned through suffering. Actually, Richard, we need to talk. He set down his cleaning cart and followed her into the office that had once been his throne room. Margaret gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same chair where she'd sat for performance reviews 15 years earlier. Your probation officer says you've been exemplary. Perfect attendance, no complaints from the other cleaning staff. Your supervisor wants to recommend you for a promotion to building maintenance. Richard's hands twisted in his lap. I don't understand why you're helping me, after everything I did. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying the broken man across from her. Prison had changed her, but accountability had transformed him into someone she barely recognized. Because revenge without redemption is just cruelty, and I refuse to become the monster you used to be. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Richard's voice cracked as he described losing his penthouse, his friends, his identity. How the cleaning job had forced him to see employees as human beings rather than disposable assets. You broke me, he admitted, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. But you rebuilt me into someone I can look at in the mirror again. Their embrace was awkward, tentative, but real. Two broken people who'd found healing in the most unlikely place. The transformation continued throughout the building. Margaret's morning walks through the offices revealed scenes that would have been impossible under Richard's regime. Jennifer Walsh mentoring 3 new analysts, teaching them the skills Margaret had once shared with her. Sarah Martinez implementing flexible work schedules for single parents. The financial turnaround was nothing short of miraculous. Ethical investing had attracted clients who valued integrity over quick profits. The company's reputation for treating employees fairly made them the destination of choice for top talent fleeing toxic corporate cultures. Margaret's health improved along with her fortunes. The stress-induced hypertension disappeared as she found peace in meaningful work. Dr. Martinez was amazed by her latest blood work results. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, he'd said. You're the healthiest 60-year-old I've seen in 20 years of practice. The family reconciliation was equally healing. Linda's basement had become headquarters for the Phoenix Circle, now a national network of women supporting each other through workplace injustice. Margaret funded scholarships for women returning to work after trauma, job training programs for former inmates, and legal aid for victims of corporate fraud. Sunday dinners at Linda's house were loud, chaotic affairs, filled with Margaret's chosen family. Former Blackwood employees, Phoenix Circle members, women whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of one person's decision to fight back, rather than disappear quietly. But the most important conversation happened on a cold February morning at Calvary Cemetery in Queens. Margaret knelt beside Thomas's headstone, her breath forming clouds in the winter air. She'd brought fresh flowers, white roses that had always been his favorite. We did it, love, she whispered to the polished granite. Your legacy lives on in every woman we help, every family we save from what happened to us. The wind carried her words across the cemetery, where other women visited other graves, carrying their own stories of loss and resilience. That evening, Margaret stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, looking out at 500 faces gathered for the Phoenix Foundation's first annual gala. Corporate executives, legal advocates, survivors of workplace trauma, and supporters who believed in second chances. We live in a world that tells us to be grateful for scraps, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the crystalline chandeliers and gold-leafed ceiling, to accept injustice as the price of keeping our jobs, our security, our place in line. She paused, thinking of the woman who'd answered that phone call in the doctor's waiting room so many months ago. But some of us refuse to disappear quietly. Some of us rise from the ashes stronger than we ever imagined possible. Some of us turn our pain into power and our trauma into transformation. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but Margaret barely heard it. She was thinking about Richard, working his way through community college business classes on weekends. About Jennifer, now being courted by headhunters from every major firm in the city. About the Phoenix Circle members starting their own companies, mentoring other women, changing the world one conversation at a time. Later that night, Margaret stood on her apartment balcony in Brooklyn Heights, looking across the water at the glittering towers of Manhattan. The city that had broken her had also forged her into something unbreakable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Proud of you, sis. Mom and Dad would be amazed." Margaret smiled, tucking the phone into her pocket as snow began to fall on the city that never sleeps. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women to help, new battles to fight. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. Stronger, wiser, and more powerful than the woman who'd been destroyed to make room for the phoenix to rise. From ashes, they rise. And Margaret Chen was just getting started.